Behold, the great worm stirs. Go out and spread the word, for he shall come and make worthy the unworthy, redeem the wicked, and purge the unclean. The Herald of Kyuss. Elminster settled beside Volo at a corner table, pipe unlit and eyes amused as the roar of the wet trout rolled over them. The largest and loudest house in Easthaven, one of the easternmost of the 10 towns, it hugged Lancashires shore, with the Redwaters a short trek away. Perfect country for rumours to drift in with the nets, where fish scales glitter on worn boots and stories outnumber the frozen mugs. I've a tale I overheard here, and dear Volo, while I won't swear to every wriggling detail, it's worth the telling, for it speaks of an elder evil, the worm that walks. Elminster's mouth quirked. Mind you, accuracy is a slippery fish in a place like this. Nevertheless, even half-true tales can warn the wise or the foolish. So, about the worm that walks. Volo leaned forward, quill poised to document the tale, despite its accuracy. Thousands of years ago, when the world was a more primitive place, a morbid mystic named Kyuss gathered a vast assembly of social outcasts for a pilgrimage across the great southern seas to the harsh jungles of another continent. On distant tropical shores, they founded a great city of monoliths and vine-snared idols to alien gods. Kyuss preached of mysterious visions, of massive metal plates foretelling the collapse of civilization. In response, his beguiled followers scoured the darkened jungle until they produced such plates and confirmed Kyuss's apocalyptic premonition. The metal plates contained a fragment of the apocalypse myth of a long-dead culture, the decadent six-armed spellweavers whose civilization crumbled before the jungle took form. The plates spoke of an era of doom and decay, a time of chaos and melancholy, known as the Age of Worms. It was but a sliver of a much grander extinct liturgy, but to Kyuss, it was enough. In his sweltering jungle paradise, the charismatic madman vowed to bring about this bold new era. As hundreds of his followers sacrificed themselves for the glory of his vision, the twisted prophet declared himself the harbinger of the Age of Worms. To amass greater and greater power, Kyuss bound himself to a basalt monolith dredged up from a spellweaver ruin and housed in a looming edifice known as the Spire of Long Shadows. The massive stone thrummed with the life energy, and poisoned whispers from its inner void beckoned Kyuss to join them in oblivion, revealing hidden pathways and temptations within the placid surface of the monolith. With his kingdom dead at his feet, Kyuss entered the immense block of otherworldly stone. In so doing, he became more than human, but his essence remained forever trapped in a horrific demiplane slave to the monolith. In the centuries that followed, the jungle swallowed Kyuss's once majestic home, leaving only the forlorn spire of Long Shadows to peak above the lush tropical canopy. Hundreds of years later, a powerful red dragon named Dragotha roosted upon the spire's lofty pinnacle, surveying the crumbling ruins of Kyuss's dream. He had learned of the potent necromantic monolith from his consort Tiamat, the supreme chromatic dragon who guarded the gates of Avernus, first layer of hell. Tiamat had turned against Dragotha, as she eventually turns on all of her lovers, and the brilliant dragon sought a means by which to protect himself against her treachery forever. To this end, Dragotha pried the basalt monolith from its moorings and carried it far to the north, to his lair in the Rift Canyon. Kyuss, trapped within some planar nether realm connected to the monolith, whispered words of confidence to Dragotha. "Release me," he claimed, "and you shall live forever." Dragotha conquered the required rituals, and Kyuss returned to the world. Shortly thereafter, Tiamat caught up with Dragotha and murdered him for some half-remembered transgression. True to his word, Kyuss restored Dragotha to life as a powerful Dracolich, fusing a part of his own essence into the bones of his rescuer. Kyuss had followed the letter of their agreement, if not the spirit, and the process virtually enslaved Dragotha to his will. The great undead dragon stood at the vanguard of an army of the spawn of the worm that walks, which savaged the native cliff-dwelling folk of the Rift Canyon, and began the first steps toward a new empire of evil. Scholars everywhere began whispering about an ancient myth regarding an age of worms, though few knew of the worm that walks history in the southern jungles. Not all of the locals fell under Kyuss's heel. A cadre of druids, inheritors of their own ancient legacy, conceived a brilliant plan to weaken the undead army. They managed somehow to steal Dragotha's phylactery, spiriting it far from the wormcrawl fissure and hiding it in an unknown location. Dragotha's sense of self-preservation at last overwhelmed his compulsion to serve Kyuss, and the Dracolich quit the field of battle. Bolstered by their victory, the druids pushed Kyuss back to the wormcrawl fissure and bound him once more into the monolith. This time, they hoped, forever. But the cliff dwellers' victory would soon prove Pyrrhic. Too few of their numbers survived the worm that walks onslaught to sustain their culture, and within a few hundred years, they had faded entirely from history. Dragotha never found his phylactery, retreating to a life of seclusion in the bitter north. But the dragon did not remain idle. With his life essence forever bound to that of the trapped Kyuss, Dragotha could not abide his master's imprisonment. Over the course of centuries, the Dracolich stitched together a vast network of agents poised to release Kyuss once again into the world. Elminster and Volo then open a purple-bound tome, the worm that walks, foretold by the scribes of Candlekeep. The worm that walks is known by many names, though of them all, Kyuss is the one true name, the most common, the most reviled, and the most feared. Edwin Tolstoff. The worm that walks is a shifting mass of maggots and worms filled with the psychic imprint of a demigod named Kyuss. Slain in another age, the worm that walks yearns to return and seize the world in its wriggling grasp, ushering in the world's last age. There are a great many uncertainties and contradictions when it comes to the elder evil known as the worm that walks. One thing all agree upon is its identity. It can be none other than Kyuss, the sire of many despicable creatures plaguing the world. This name holds dreadful import not because of any remembered atrocity attributed to his name, but because of the things serving him still. His minions are numerous, ranging from grotesque undead to hideous aberrations. It is these servants mortals have come to revile, and they extend their loathing to the worm that walks for his part in bringing them into being. Scholars of forbidden lore claim that Kyuss walked the earth in an ancient era, long before the oldest kingdoms of the modern day. This time was one of great evil, when humanity dabbled with the blasphemous arts and served the dark gods. Kyuss was either a mortal necromancer of considerable talent or an evil god's ranking priest. The most common theory claims that Kyuss was so wicked, even his decadent society exiled him, casting him out because he dabbled in forbidden arts and spoke ominous prophecies of an impending final age. Rather than languishing as an outcast, he became a prophet and drew to him followers who clamored to hear his grim words. They saw him as the god's servant, if not a god in his own right, and believed if they curried his favor, he would shelter them from the horrific age he promised would come. Kyuss discovered the ruins of a dead civilization. The structures that remained bore many strange writings, depictions of human sacrifice, and six-armed tyrants ruling over all. Kyuss claimed this site for his own, and commanded his people to rebuild the city from the wreckage. Although he ruled as god and king, the disturbing visions and his own discontentment urged him to seek greater power, to find some way to transcend the mortal flesh and become more than a man, to become a true god. His path was clear when his followers discovered ancient metal plates, which held terrible secrets, but also confirmed every prophetic word he had spoken. Through these inscriptions, he discovered the incantation to let him transcend mortality at a terrible price: the lives of his congregation. For this prophet, no price was too high, and on one bloody night, he instructed his priests to round up the followers and slaughter them all. When they finished, Kyuss murdered the murderers. With the blood of thousands staining his hands, he turned to the great obelisk his servants had pulled from the earth and intoned the words to begin his transformation. When he was finished, he stepped into the stone, fusing his essence with the foul rock, gaining and losing his divinity in one moment. He was neither mortal nor God. He was something far worse. Kyuss hungers for conquest. Trapped within his prison, his fractured mind conceives and discards innumerable plots to escape. No idea is sufficient to break his bonds. No trick shrewd enough to let him slip free. Instead, he beats against the walls and howls with 1,000 voices. Aside from the confinement he endures, his frustration stems from the knowledge that, if he could break free, he would set in motion the events to lead up to the last age of mankind, the mysterious Age of Worms. Throughout his long life, he has caught glimpses of this time when he is the master, the lord, and ruler of all things. He covets this end, for he knows by achieving it, he will rise in power and attain the godhood he seeks. An obscure cadre of ex-clerics banded together to find some way to restore their fallen gods to power. Consisting of Bane, Pal, and Myrkul's priests, they have an uneasy alliance, setting aside their differences to work toward their common goal. Though treachery is never far from their minds, having acquired a few rare manuscripts, they have come to believe the worm that walks contains a divine spark that, if harnessed, could restore life to their fallen gods. Among the bold sailors who braved the great crossing to and from Mystica, there are legends of Wormcrawl Island, a terrifying place far from any charted waters. Those searching for its location find little to aid them, for even the elves of Evermeet do not speak of it, except to warn that it harbors a great and terrible evil. The spawn began with Kyuss, an ancient priest of a forgotten deity who ruled an empire before the advent of modern civilization. Little remains in writing of the details concerning Kyuss and his rule, but it seems clear his skill at creating undead was unsurpassed. Eventually, the Necromancer priest vanished into parts unknown, leaving in his wake an empire of the dead. Yet while relatively little information survives to inform the modern scholar about the man himself, of his spawn, much has been documented. The first reports of free-willed spawn of Kyuss came from adventurers who dared explore a forgotten and shadowed spur of the Great Rift Canyon. Known now as the Wormcrawl Fissure, this region is reputed to have once been the seat of his power. Certainly, the area was infested with his spawn. Strangely enough, explorers in the Amedio jungle to the south began to report encounters with identical creatures in the western reach of the jungles. As time wore on, the spawn began to appear in other regions as well, usually in large urban areas. These spawn were spread deliberately by cultists who proclaimed that Kyuss himself had not vanished from the world. Indeed, they believed that he had become a god, and it was their duty to spread his spawn throughout the world to herald his imminent return. Dearest readers, this guidebook, Volo's Guide to the Elder Evils, is the next radiant lantern in my ongoing tour of the realms. Nay, of all sensible places where purses jingle and ale is poured. You will find no more diligent or daring guide than your humble servant, Volothamp Gedarn. I have trudged, ridden, swum, sailed, and flown from the icy wastes, north of the spine of the world, to the steaming jungles of the shining south, and beyond, all for thee, dear traveller. Many have accused me, cruelly, of flights of fancy. I plead gloriously guilty to this. A compliment well aimed is a civic virtue. And to this, I answer thus. when the truth arrives panting and pale, it is the sacred duty of a writer to wrap it in a cloak and usher it to the front of the stage. Still, what follows is as faithful as a paladin's oath, and, perhaps twice, as entertaining. Chapter 1. Edwin Tolstoff. Allow me to introduce Edwin Tolstoff, scholar, striver, and proof that curiosity, when left unchaperoned, will elope with catastrophe. Edwin found standard magical studies as thin as a mooncalf's soup, and took to richer fare in the cellars, where the wine is forbidden and the candles smell of grave dust. There, he pledged himself to Neril, dour lord of endings, and set about pruning the faculty in a manner both murderous and methodical. Colleagues vanished, knowledge increased, a tidy exchange if one mistakes ethics for clutter. Now, gentles, a word from your eminently experienced guide. When you knock on the back door of the cosmos, mind whom you invite to supper. The worm that walks noticed Edwin. His reward came in the fashion such beings prefer, patient, intimate, and irreversible. A host of worms. Yes, actual worms. I apologize if you were eating breakfast. Who ate Edwin from the inside out and then wore the outline of the man like a festival costume. He was reborn as a collection of worms. One does not anticipate this sort of promotion, and Edwin most certainly did not. For a time he hid beneath heavy hooded robes, a mask of scholarly sobriety, and enough protective magics to make a lich's accountant blush. He walked carefully, spoke sparingly, and powdered his gloves with chalk to keep the sleeves from, well, dripping. Yet the world has a keen nose for rot, and Edwin's trail, husks here, a glistening smear there, sang a soft, terrible song. He convinced himself that freedom lay in the release of the worm that walks, that by uncorking the bottle, he might be poured back into his proper flesh. But somewhere beneath the mask, Edwin knew the likely end, absorption into the greater mass, a drop returning to the ocean. Two roads, both trending toward death. Thus, he chose the shorter and called it hope. Edwin withdrew to the Tolstoff estate, where he was sealed in a warded undercroft, rings of iron, glyphs, and a collection of protection spells. Edwin Tolstoff urged his grandchildren to kill their mother and become his servants. He used his heirs to release him from his cult. As this terrible act occurs, spawn of Kyuss appeared. From old dungeons, ruins, and forgotten castles, these undead spread through the land. If one squints, to murder their mother, a sentence I pen with both quill and a wince, and so prove themselves, that they might serve him and undo his bonds. Families, I remind you, are the most expensive rituals of all. Chapter 2. True Adventure. Gentles. Having furnished you with the lamentable case of Edwin Tolstoff, see preceding chapter and do steel thy stomach, I now present a fresh account gathered in the bustling jewel of northern Chult, Port Nyanzaru, where perfumes of spiced fruit wrestle daily with the honest odour of dinosaur and dock slime. There, two singular adventurers crossed my path, and by Timora's tilted smile, tramped straight into the wriggling business of Kyuss. They were an unlikely but effective pair. Magna Mountain Tamer, a Goliath barbarian who claims the title Conqueror of the Spine of the World and Slayer of the White Dragon of the Peak, and Jinzik, a genius gnome artificer of Candlekeep, whose pockets contain more inventions than I have creditors, and I have quite a few. Amid a sullen spate of dockside murders, Magnor's nose for bloodwork and Jinzik's nose for residue, arcane, fishy, or otherwise, identified the culprit, Drain, a wicked were-a-rat whisper gnome with a knack for vanishing into crowds and crawl spaces alike. Their pursuit uncovered the lycanthrope's mistress, Katarin Tolstoff, yes, that family, who fled at the first glint of Magna's axe. The chase led past saffron stalls and thunder lizards to the Tolstoff family's coastal redoubt. There, our heroes got their first close look at a spawn of Kyuss. From afar, a common zombie. Up close, scores of little green worms threading in and out of the thing like blasphemous embroidery. The worms leapt for Magna's skin and sought Jinzik's veins. A practical interlude by Volo. Do not grapple a spawn. Burn what wriggles. If you must vomit, aim away from the oil you just poured. With fire, radiant craft, and an artificer's grenade that sounded like a kettle having opinions, the pair dispatched the foul creatures. Katerin slipped their net, Tolstoff's do, but not before the name Edwin threaded the air like a bad smell. Weeks later, as racing drums pounded and the markets glittered from Port Nyanzaru, citizens vanished from streets, homes, and even beds. The mood curdled, the cries for action grew teeth. The mayor, remembering who had quietly tidied the docks, entreated Magna and Jinzik to help. Tracks of fear and damp led beneath the city to a buried temple, columns like rotted fangs, murals revised into something a little more honest. At its heart preached a mad Avalakia, worm-fattened and ecstatic, infecting captives with bright green worms to make more spawn. Magna's answer was decisive and two-handed. Jinzik's was ingenious and very nearly set his own eyebrows aflame, the wirily inventor. The Avalakia fell to a decapitation from Magna's axe, which was odd since it was mostly a collection of worms. The captives, those not too far gone, lived. And the city exhaled, only to inhale again at rumours of similar disappearances across Chult. Months later, wind and rumour bore them to Port Castigliar, a small settlement tucked in seldom visited Refuge Bay. Castigliar, I note, was a wealthy Scardale noble. His nephew Ilibakitcha named and settled the place as a beachhead for training, rest and resupply. Jinzik, ever drawn to the promise of enhancements to his craft and components for further advancement of the weave, visited the general store. He felt arcane trace humming beneath the floorboards, then noticed what was not there. Anyone. The place had been ransacked. Below, in a crawl space furred with dust and dread, 2 shop helpers, once kindly hands to the Engaruka, had been made undead horrors. From the survivors, wide-eyed, shaking, and very nearly in need of new names, they drew a description of the thief. A robed figure, worms where a man's true body should have been. He signed his robbery with a name already inked in our previous chapter, Edwin. The tally of stolen goods included much that was petty and portable, but one loss shone like a beacon through a fog of lesser crimes. A well of many worlds, a disk of portable elsewhere. This strange interdimensional device looked just like a portable hole. Anything placed within it is immediately cast to another world. A parallel world. Their plan was a transit to Port Nyanzaru, and thence to Silvery Moon. Imagine what a creature of Kyuss could do with a door that opens onto anywhere. We have then a line. Katerin Tolstoff running, Spawn rising, and Avalakia recruiting unwilling congregants, and Edwin, no longer merely a scholar's tragedy, stealing passages between worlds. Whether he seeks to free the greater worm, flee his own writhing fate, or feed Chult to 1,000 small hungers, I cannot yet say. But patterns, like tunnels, go somewhere. Chapter 3. Tomb of Annihilation. South of the Mistcliff, a sheer volcanic escarpment that kept the sea where it belonged in the land in a dramatic company. Panic ran like fire in a wheat field. Whole forests crawled with the spawn of Kyuss. Into this stew slithered a soft-voiced saviour, the herald of Kyuss, who presented himself, herself, itself, the memory balks, as a rescued survivor from beneath the Port Castigliar general store. With eyes perfectly wet and wrists perfectly bruised, the herald sought out Magna and Jinzik and spun a tale. The culprit behind these phenomena was not Kyuss's creeping congregation. Oh no, but a miracle the chaotic, a miracle, the herald confided, meant to plunge a sphere of annihilation into a well of many worlds, to erase our world, and perhaps all worlds. Now, I know a miracle by reputation, and a singed moustache I will not discuss. The story fit just well enough to itch. Thus did Magna and Jinzik accompany the survivor to Emericle's tower, a thing precariously moored in a pocket dimension between the Shadowfell and the material. They fought, as one does when door knockers manifest as hungry geometries, spells and steel painting the air. Then came the turn. Somewhere between shouted countersigns and an artificer's detonation, Edwin Tolstoff slipped through the tower's back logic and stole the talisman of the sphere. 3 great minds realized it at once. 3 voices stopped mid-calamity. Emiracle lowered his hand. Magna lowered his axe. Jinzik patted out his sleeve. Apologies abounded. Elminster's marginal note. I concede the madman is not the villain today. Mark the date. With the talisman pocketed, Edwin's next need was blunt, the sphere of annihilation itself. He tortured sages, may their names be reclaimed, until a consensus bubbled up from the screams. Asurarak's Tomb of Horrors. Yes, that one. Our Edwin, being many things but no fool, hired anonymously a hard-eyed druid named Oris to survey the dungeon. Oris did so with admirable grimness, springing traps by instinct rather than luck, and Edwin shadowed him. A rumour threaded through corridors. At the threshold of the sphere, Oris felt victory's weight. Edwin felt an opportunity. With the talisman singing in his gloved hand, he seized control of the sphere, blackness that drinks geometry, while countless undead flowed in like night after the sun has somewhere better to be. Oris nearly banished Edwin. Say the word almost with the full bitterness it deserves, but the tide of horrors forced the druid's retreat. The druid carved his way out of the tomb, bringing the full elements and wrath of the creatures from the forest to aid his escape. Now, where do all close-run survivors go in Chult? Port Nyanzaru, of course, where street races trumpet through the avenues, dinosaur drums rattle teeth, and the Amnian trade colony juggles coin and contracts with the grace of a pickpocket priest. There, amid a market just glancing over the sunrise, Magna and Jinzik found Oris recounting his tale to Amnian traders, some of whom, I assure you, are nobility in travel clothing. Between bets on the running of the saws and appraisals of portable idol heads, Oris asked for their help. He had not come empty-handed before Magna and Jinzik. With the aid of a solemn mage in Amnian employ, he'd already cast Discern Location. The needle quivered, then pointed into old myth. Wormcrawl Island, southernmost of a scattered chain, once a Nerolite shrine. Forever, the place where Kyuss flayed 10,000 followers in an unholy calculus toward godhood. If Edwin meant to free his master, this was the altar, the scaffold, the stage. Then we have a single errand first, Jinzik is said to have declared, tightening the strap on his staff of power. We retrieve the well of many worlds. Whatever else Edwin empties from this world, we cannot refill. Remember, dearest reader, the most certain way to succeed is always to try. Just one more time. Magna grinned. Then let the worm that walks come forth. Let justice be done upon him. And after we get there, what then? After, said Oris, we end the ritual, or the ritual ends us. This is our burden to carry. Now, dear reader, you expect me to detail the voyage. The wards cracked, the well reclaimed, the island stormed, and the rite undone. I would, were it not that no spawn of Kyuss have been credibly sighted in years. From this, your humble guide infers success. One can sometimes read a tale by the silence it leaves behind. And just as I said so, here, at a corner table in the wet trout of East Haven, where the fishwives argue like bards and the mead remembers the better days of Icewind Dale, the door just happened to swing wide open, and in walked a barbarian and a gnome, the mountain tamer and the genius tinkerer. I looked at Elminster. He looked at me. We both chuckled. How predictable, we said, and how blessed. For in a world with wells, spheres and worms, it is a comfort to find heroes who arrive precisely when a story requires them.
Predictable? Perhaps. Necessary? Absolutely. Now by the next round, Volo. Magnor does look thirsty. I would also just like to thank Lorebrary. Now, like and subscribe if you wish to join us for another tale.